The sun had just begun its slow climb over Capernaum. Light spilled across the dusty streets, warming the clay walls and waking the early risers of the marketplace. But this morning was different. People weren't gathering to trade spices or fish or woven cloth. They were gathering for one reason. The news had spread so fast it felt as if the air itself carried it from house to house. Jesus was here. Families moved quietly, almost reverently, as if they were afraid to disturb the hope they carried. Some walked with children clasped to their chests. Others limped forward with wounds they no longer had the strength to hide. Yet no one complained. They all came with one thought, one need. The man who opened blind eyes had come to their town. The man whose words calmed storms walked their streets. Jesus didn't enter the city like a torch in the night. He didn't shout or call attention to himself. But his presence stirred something deeper than excitement. It stirred awe. His pace was steady, unhurried, almost deliberate. His gaze wasn't drifting toward the crowd pressing around him. It was fixed on something beyond them, something eternal. That morning, he had agreed to visit the dying daughter of a synagogue leader. People expected to follow him to that miracle. They didn't know he was about to stop for another. As he walked, the crowd closed around him like a tide. Hands reached toward him from every side. Fingers brushed the edge of his robe. Arms pushed forward for even a moment of closeness. The sound of muttering voices, feet shuffling, and heartbeats blended into a living storm of desperate need. Then it happened. So fast no one saw it, yet so real it changed everything. Someone touched him. Not the accidental shove of a passerby, not the eager swipe of a curious hand. Something else. Something with weight. Something with intention. And Jesus stopped. The noise around him thinned into a stunned silence. The disciples stared at him, confused by his sudden stillness. Jesus turned slowly, his eyes scanning the crowd, searching, not for a face, but for a soul. Who touched me? The disciples couldn't hide their disbelief. Master, look at this crowd. Everyone is touching you. But Jesus wasn't asking about physical contact. He wasn't confused about what had happened. He felt something they didn't. In a moment so quiet only heaven noticed, faith had reached him before a voice ever did. Then she appeared. She stepped forward from behind the wall of bodies, trembling like a flame in the wind. Her shoulders hunched from years of exhaustion. Her eyes held the red, swollen imprint of countless sleepless nights. Dust clung to her knees and the edges of her robe. She had lived 12 long years with a bleeding condition that isolated her from everyone she loved. She wasn't allowed to touch anyone. She wasn't welcome in the temple. She wasn't considered clean enough to stand in public, let alone in a crowd this large. But here she was. She fell to her knees at his feet, the earth beneath her palms mixing with her tears. For a moment she couldn't even lift her head. She had spent over a decade hiding in shadows, avoiding eyes that judged her and hands that pushed her aside. She had learned to shrink her voice, to shrink her presence until she felt like she didn't belong anywhere. And now she was on the ground before the one person she had dared to hope in. Jesus looked at her, not quickly, not casually, but deeply. Time seemed to stretch under the weight of his gaze. In that brief sacred moment, he saw everything. He saw the 12 years of pain, the doctors who promised help but delivered disappointment, the temple doors that refused to open for someone like her, the neighbors who whispered when she walked by, the nights she sat awake, hands over her face, begging God to let her feel normal again. He saw the way she'd carried her shame like a second skin. He saw the day she whispered to herself, "If I can just touch his cloak, that will be enough." And he saw the moment her trembling fingers brushed his garment and her world shifted. She felt the change instantly. The bleeding stopped. The ache vanished. Strength returned to her limbs in a way she hadn't felt since her youth. She knew she was healed before he even turned around. She hadn't planned on being seen. She wanted to slip away unnoticed, disappear back into the alleys with her miracle tucked quietly inside her chest. But Jesus wouldn't let her leave that way. He didn't want her to walk home healed but still carrying the shame of her story. He wanted her story to be lifted into the light. The crowd watched, waiting to see if he would rebuke her for touching him. After all, according to the law, she shouldn't have been anywhere near him. But that was not why Jesus had stopped. He bent down and called her something the world had long denied her. Daughter. The word fell over her like warm oil, seeping into cracks she thought would never close. She had been nameless in her suffering, labeled only by her disease. But now she was seen, known, claimed. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. In front of the same people who had avoided her, judged her, and whispered about her, Jesus restored not just her body, but her identity. She was no longer the woman with the issue of blood. She was a daughter. She belonged. The miracle wasn't hidden, wasn't quiet, it wasn't private. It was restored dignity, restored worth, restored life. People touched Jesus all the time, but only one touch had made him stop. Not because it was bold, but because it was honest. Because it wasn't grasping for attention or demanding power. It was a touch born from fragile faith and raw need. And Jesus always turns toward faith. We live in a world that hides pain behind silence. A world that judges weakness. A world too fast and too loud to notice trembling hands reaching out in the crowd. But Jesus notices. He sees the ones who feel unseen. He hears the quiet faith no one else hears. He doesn't ask for perfect words. He doesn't wait for perfect people. He stops for the ones who dare to hope again, even after years of disappointment. If all you have left is a whisper, he hears it. If all you can offer is a trembling hand, he sees it. If all you can do is reach for the edge of his presence, he turns toward you. Because faith, even small faith, is never invisible to him. And sometimes all it takes is one quiet reach to make heaven pause.